What we're going to be looking at today and going through is the population units 4 of the human side of A-level geography. So when we're going through this, and when we're going through this, you can use the worksheet and revision sheet here to answer the questions going through. And if you're able to answer these key questions, it's good for your revision in terms of this unit. So unit 4 here. So unit 4 is all about the population structure, demographic transition model, food securities, and ways to control our population. So let's have a look at the first two questions here. How was the global population change, and what are global pandemic setbacks? So you can see here a really key graph here how the population has changed, and over the past kind of 2.5 million years, population has been considerably under 1 billion people, but as we've developed and carrying capacity has increased, and carrying capacity is the amount of people we can sustain via resources, and population has increased, so has the population to over 8 billion into the future. Okay, so population has grown rapidly in the past 1,000 years. Now, there has been big setbacks to this. Smallpox is one, the Black Death is another, and you can count coronavirus as a very small pandemic here, but pandemics are normally events which cause a setback in this carrying capacity overall population event. On average, population is increased by 70 million a year. Okay, and what would be really good for you to do is to actually Google what the current growth rate of the world is, and insert a world population growth graph, something similar to what's in the textbook here. So you've got that in your notes as well. We then go on to what happens to the population. So there's something called population momentum. Why did the population increase so much? And that's because we had so many young people. If we have quite a large young population, all these young people will eventually reproduce and have children. Okay, and if that means that kind of doubles in effect, and we call that population momentum. So the more young people we have and the more births they will have will mean we get that kind of ramp up in population. Now that's kind of dying out now as we're going towards more aging populations, but still in some places in the world like Uganda and Nigeria, this population momentum is still continuing. We then have to look how we measure this. So how do we look at the population of components of change? Birth rate, the amount of births per 1,000 per year, and a lot of these things are per 1,000 per year, and they're presented by 0/00 per year, like that. You've got death rate, which is the same. Natural increase, because it's natural, is the difference between death rate and birth rate. It's called natural increase. Net migration is the difference between immigration and emigration. Immigration is like coming into the country. Emigration is like going out, exiting the country. You can put both of them together and get a population change as well. This should give you a few here. I think a good thing to do is what is the current natural increase in the UK? Google search what the current UK is. The unit then goes on to fertility rates, so factors affecting fertility rates, and we then go into these factors in a bit more detail here. And there's 8 factors in total here which affect fertility rate, and they're all to do with kind of quality of life and the economic and the development of the country. So let's go through them individually. First one is death rate, especially the infant mortality. So normally the higher the infant mortality, the higher the fertility rate. So more women have more children because their children aren't likely to make it past their first or second birthday to kind of maintain. So some women in South Africa may have 8 to 9 children, okay, because less of them survive and more child death. Tradition, having large families. Women with a desire to have larger families, more of a tradition in some cultures. Education. Now this can lower fertility rates. The more educated someone is, tends to have less children. Okay, so birth control, education, and stuff like that tends to have less. Age structure of the population. If you've got a more elderly population, like Japan, for example, in Japan, it says here, only 14% of the population are under 16, and the number of future birth rate or the fertility rate is expected to be a lot lower. Whereas in Mali, 48% of the population under 16, you can expect to have a higher fertility rate in the future. Religion is also one. So in some religions, they don't believe in contraception and believe in having larger families, and therefore they have a larger fertility rate. Economic factors, poorer countries tend to have a larger fertility rate than richer countries as well. Government policies, one-child policy like China, or the Singapore one or more policy, two or more. Status of women, they're more highly educated. Kerala is a good example of this. The more highly educated, more up women are, the less children they tend to have. I could use Brazil as an example here. And that is it. So there's your 8 factors there: death rate, tradition, education, age structure, religion, economic factors, government policy, and the status of women. And that should give you a nice one for this one here. So how does fertility rate change in LICs? LICs tend to have a really, really high fertility rate, but tends to slowly decrease over time. That has a thing called that population momentum, which it brings up again here. So it stays high for a good number of years. About 50 countries are at this stage at the moment. HICs, here where population growth has been slow for several decades, we tend to see a very low fertility rate and more aging populations, so the opposite, sustained fall, the opposite of this population momentum. It's then worth stopping on this Kerala case study and seeing how one country that has a really high fertility rate is comparison to one place within that country that's very low. So we talked about Kerala and the education of women. So they value the education of women a lot higher. So the total fertility rate is lower in Kerala than it is in the rest of India. And it's around about the same on the UK. I reckon that's to do with a higher female literacy rate, lower infant mortality. The life expectancy of women in Kerala is a lot higher as well. All going into the fact that they promote education, and higher education in girls outnumbers boys in Kerala, all adds to this difference in fertility rate. And that should bring you up to here. Okay, we're going to then look at mortality rates. So again, there's 8 factors here that affect mortality rates. First one is poverty. Okay, the poorer a country is, the more likely you are to die, is the basic one in that one. Infant mortality rate increases mortality rate, so the higher that figure is, the bigger mortality rate is going to be influenced. Medical infrastructure, the less people earn, the less doctors per 100,000 people, the more likely the mortality rates. The mortality rates, how many deaths per 1,000 is going to increase, isn't it? Economic development, again, can we have clean water? Can we have sewage disposal? Can we have proper electricity, gas? All these kind of things that we need to survive. Okay, that's to do with economic development. If that is low, then the mortality rate is high. Aging population, so even in Japan have a high mortality rate because they've got lots of old people, again, so it could be older generations causing a higher mortality rate. Diseases or viruses like HIV and AIDS, Ebola, and so on. Non-communicable diseases, so these are things like things that we don't really see, so bad diets, availability of certain foods, certain incomes, life expectancy. So non-communicable diseases, so these are also called degenerative diseases, including health conditions for personal lifestyle preferences, smoking, high blood pressure, heart disease, and things like that. These tend to happen more in HICs, these non-communicable diseases. Okay? Injury-related deaths, so just general accidents. So obviously health and safety systems are key to keeping this mortality rate low. So there's your 8 factors again. Make sure you get the 8 factors. You can go back through them as well. Next thing we can go on to is population pyramids. So what is the structure of population pyramid? The key thing to do, maybe get a few population pyramids in, Google some few and get them into your notes. That will be key there as well. We have male and female side. It shows age on this axis here, and percentage of population, or sometimes per million population on the bottom. We have a few different ones here. Mexico is what we call a bottom heavy one, where it's wider, so it's got a very young population. United States has got a very middle aging population, and the majority of people are 30 to 50. And then Sweden kind of has a 40 to 50 age population, but an aging population at the same time, as well as something down here. Okay, and they have what we call a baby boom, or a population where you get a sudden increase in birth rate. Okay, the UK had this after the war as well. Dependency ratio. Okay, how do we measure how many old versus young? This is a simple equation here. Young dependent percentage plus old dependent percentage over working percentage times 100. These young dependents tend to be those under about 19 years old. Older dependents are those over 60 or 65, and working populations between 16 to kind of 65 in population. So what happens if you have an imbalance in this dependency ratio? What tends to happen is you have an imbalance in the structure of a country. And if you have more old dependents on the old index ratio, which is just removing the young, your pensions, your taxes will be higher. If you have quite a young population, what tends to happen is you have an increase in unemployment as there's not enough jobs and factories and things to go around to employ these people. So make sure when you go onto this worksheet here, what is population periods, what is baby booms, try and get some population pyramids in there, what's the dependency ratio, and what are the issues with the imbalance as well. We then go on to pass these population pyramids here to the demographic transition model. Stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here. Stage 1 tends to be quite like tribes, very non-communicable people in rainforest, things like that. Stage 2 is very early developments of so country like Congo and so on as stage 2 of the development. And then you go into a bit more development like stage 3, okay, where education and medicine become more and more Philippines, things like that. Stage 4 tends to be more developing countries like India, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, and stage 5, UK, Germany. I mean, you can go beyond that into stage 6, near enough where you've got like Japan and Sweden and so on. So most of you, make sure you insert the demographic transition model as well, would be a good idea. Few issues with it. They say it's very Eurocentric, so it's based on European countries and how European countries develops. It's not very easy to apply to different countries as well. It ignores different regions like Kerala in India. It just generalizes the whole country. It can't really predict what's going to happen to countries at certain stages. Has no real time scale. Does not take into account governments. Cannot predict outbreaks or pandemics like we're currently having as well, and HIV and AIDS and war and so on as well. So we then move on to youthful and aging populations and kind of the impacts that they cause. Okay, so and we'll go straight into the case studies for them. So I'll leave these kind of up here for you. I'll zoom out a bit more, and you have these in the kind of notes as well. So be key to read through both of these and add these to your notes. So Uganda is a really good example of youthful population, and the UK is a really good example of aging population there. Okay, so have a read. We also did Japan for aging population as well. So what are the links between population development? There's a few links to say that the more developed the country, the more the higher the HDI, so the Human Development Index, closer to 1, the better life people have, but tends to have a lower population. Okay, tends to have a lower growth rate. Okay, so here's how human development. It says taking into everything into account, like how long people live, their decent and their standard of living, but it would tend to have tend to be a better demographic transition model. But they tend to have a lower fertility rate, but a lower birth rate as well. So what is the link between development and population change? You can increase purchasing power. The more you develop, that means you can buy better things for your country. Increase education means people live and have a longer, healthier life, understand their education better. Same with kind of food and access. Normally have antenatal population policies as well. We then go on to the importance of food security. And so food security is about sufficient quantity of food to last enough time. Not only that, enough variety of food for people to have access and have money to be able to purchase as well. So it's not just about having enough food, you need enough food that's affordable and enough range of food as well that can have access to the whole population. So some countries don't have what we call food security, and we call that food insecurity. So what are the consequences of food shortages? What causes it? So you can have monoculture, so only culturing one crop can cause food insecurity. You can have droughts, floods, tropical events, so cyclones, pests, locusts, diseases, and low capital investment, low workers, low people actually working on these farms and things. Poor transport, getting the food from the farms to the people that need it. Wars, Sudan, Congo, and so on have stopped that. Biofuels, because biofuels make more money than crops. So some countries like Brazil make more biofuels than they actually do crops to feed their own country. You'll then be on food shortages in Swaziland. Again, a good one to read through and add some extra facts and information to. And it's just here as well. So nearly finished off now, but just here as well. So what's the role of technology? How do we solve food insecurity? We can use high yielding crops. We can use genetically modified crops, better irrigation systems, chemical fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides, mechanical farming, more commercial farming, land reformation projects, improvements in rural transport systems, getting the food to the people, genetically modifying crops, selective breeding. We went through a few examples like the Brazilian super cow, golden rice are good examples of them as well. So that's the green revolution, is this generation of new food and innovations and improvements. Nothing to do with climate change. People sometimes get mixed up. It's this green revolution, is the innovations to solve this food insecurity problem. So once we go on to that, we're like, well, right, so if we solve food security, our population tends to increase rapidly. So how do we sustain this population? Okay, and what are the problems of sustaining quite a high population? What's the optimum population we have, and how can we sustain that? The poverty is a really bad thing that can bring down our population quite quickly. Famine's another one. Plague is another one. These pandemics are on about. War, natural disasters, and political instability and corruption can also affect sustaining a good maintaining population as well. If we then look at this, so I just mentioned this as well, we can have overpopulation where there's too many people for the amount of resources. We can have underpopulation where there's not enough people to balance with the resources, or we can have the balance in between, which is what we call our optimum population as well. Now, obviously, countries can control this, and they can say that if population gets too high, obviously famine, war, and corruption might be more prevalent in these countries. So I want you to have a quick read and remember what Malthus and Boserup said about this. So Malthus, I always said miserable Malthus. He also said there could be a cull or a drop off because the population gets too high. And Boserup always said that she was brainy and would invent our way out the solutions to the high yielding crops and so on I went through before. But we can control the populations, and the best way of doing this is anti and pronatal. Anti is against having children, so forced sterilisation, free contraception, family planning, and so on. And pronatalists like Singapore is allowing families to have more children to increase the fertility rate to have more population as well. It's worth having another read through. I imagine you guys have read through and looked at this quite a few times. Another read through China's one child policy as well, and what's happened in the future debates about that working too well and the problems that has caused. So I'll just slowly scroll through this so you can pause at any point, have a look. That's the whole population unit. You can look at the extra case study of Singapore, one or more pronatal notes, not in textbook, but you're more than welcome to Google this and have a research. Try and fill in this worksheet as best as you can, and you've gone through the whole of the population unit as well.